Well,
Hey, my dear.
how are
How are you
you?
tonight? We're earlier tonight than we normally are, but we appreciate our guests.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our guest tonight is Martha Carlin, and she had something she had to do at our normal time. So, we bumped her back an hour and we said, let's do it. So, whatever it is to take to, accommodate um, our guest that we have on. So, Martha, welcome.
Thank you, Sherry. I appreciate you and Becky having me. I'm excited to talk to you guys.
Oh, well, I mean, you and I can, the three of us can talk and talk and talk anyway. So, but let me introduce you officially. You are a transformational leader who took your business sense and experience and you turned it around as an expert to become a leading citizen scientist in the field of microbiome. Now, already everybody's like, what? A citizen scientist, and I love that, Martha. We can go on here, but you founded the BioCollective, which is a company dedicated to study the microbiome and its impact on human health. Now, you also have done some pretty groundbreaking research, and you also launched the BioQuest, which is a brand of targeted probiotics, and it offers customized probiotics based on an individual's microbiome. So I'm going to kind of stop there. I'm going to just let you talk about whatever it is you want. But one question is, how did you even start doing this, Martha?
Sure. So, actually, I was my business training and my degree is in accounting. And I graduated from college, went to work for Arthur Anderson, and was trained in something called transaction flow review, which is how you look at a business to identify business risk. And so we would go out to all of our clients and draw these giant flow charts of all the different processes in the business and everything that was flowing through the business. And so I applied that throughout my business career for about 20 years. And in 2002, my 44-year-old husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And I mean, you go in, the neurologist is like, well, you have Parkinson's disease. Actually, I had pretty much diagnosed it myself after reading Michael J. Fox's book and another book called Saving Millie. And I kind of knew what it was and got him to go to the doctor. But the doctor, they give you a prescription and basically tell you there's nothing really that you can do except come back and see me in 6 months and we'll adjust your medicine. They just, the approach to it is not very root cause based, even looking for root cause. And of course, with my background, I looked at it and I said, this is a systems problem. And I'm going to approach it like I approach business. And so with that, I kind of started mapping out what's going on in what is going through the body, what's flowing through the system. And of course, the bulk of that is food. So, food and water. And so, my initial studying, I mean, I had taken the last chemistry class I took was my freshman year in college. And then I decided that was going to be way too much work. and accounting was a lot easier. And I was like, I kind of want to have fun in college, so I'm not going to be a chemical engineer. But anyway, I went back and started studying food chemistry, the chemicals that are used on food and all. And back in 2002, there really wasn't organic food or there were very few organic brands. And, I threw out everything in the pantry and started to work cooking from scratch. But at that time, there like I said, there wasn't a lot of organic. There wasn't all this whole network of people with this incredible knowledge about how food is impacting our body back then. So anyway, along the way, I'm teaching myself these little bits and pieces of science and putting the puzzle together and having an impact on John. So he was definitely doing much better than most people with Parkinson's. His doctor would always say, you're the best of all my patients. He was in a clinical trial and they said he was in the top 1 percentile. So that always made me say, okay, well, something that we're doing is right related to this food. But in 2014, I read a book called Missing Microbes by Dr. Martin Blazer, and it was about the rise of chronic disease since the discovery of antibiotics and how antibiotics were changing this thing called the microbiome and how that was impacting our health, and that certain antibiotics would change the microbiome and it could never really bounce back. And that to me kind of translated for me like as an accountant to the general ledger of the body. And I was like, okay. So 6 months later, the first peer-reviewed publication came out that showed that they could divide the two different types of Parkinson's. One of them is tremor dominant, and the other is posture and gait. So more trouble walking and the bent posture. They could actually divide them by the bacteria in their gut. And I was like, that's it. I quit my job. We started funding a research project at the University of Chicago looking at our samples. And that by that, I mean our poop. We were having that sequenced. So doing the genome of the whole stool. And, people may be familiar with the human genome. Well, one bowel movement has anywhere between 150 and 300 times more genetic material than the human genome. So like orders of magnitude. So in that process, I met a top researcher, Dr. Jack Gilbert at the University of Chicago, and he went on to become a co-founder with me with another Dr. Suzanne Vernon, who had been studying chronic fatigue and worked for the CDC for almost 20 years. And we saw these patterns across diseases. Jack had a son who was autistic. Suzanne had worked with chronic fatigue, and we could see that there were these metabolic issues across the population. And even though we call them these single diseases, that we felt like the microbiome would really show us these interconnected patterns that were causing our disease. And so that was back in 2015. So I founded the BioCollective, and we actually started collecting poop from people. And we went on to collect about 1,000 samples across the population from healthy people from different disease types and do the genomic sequencing through a company called Cosmos ID, and went on to start to connect dots and make connections. And then I brought on a new chief scientific officer who had almost 40 years of microbial ecology. He was a microbiologist at Cal Poly, a professor, and he really understood from both the human and the environmental side all these aspects of the microbiome and the interconnection. And we started then to come up with our concepts for BiotiQuest probiotics and building out a strain bank and unique formulas where we build teams of organisms to put back functions in your gut that you've lost. So that was a long story there. But it's been it's been 8 years since we started the BioCollective, and we still use the data and work with data scientists and researchers all around the globe. We have shared our samples with researchers. I even talked to someone today who was looking at Parkinson's research and wanting to look at our data in context with several other sets of data to see if they can use AI and machine learning to identify more patterns. But one of the things I know, we all met through Keto Camp, and um, one of the things in the process of looking at Parkinson's and really across these chronic illnesses, we had looked at disrupted sugar metabolism, and uh, there's so much added sugar to the sad American diet. um, and so that was really one of our first ideas, partly because in Parkinson's, they sometimes called Parkinson's and Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes or an insulin resistance of the brain. And 2/3 of people with Parkinson's have some kind of insulin dysregulation. Many of them go on to have diabetes, but there's several research papers on the connection with glucose in blood sugar dysregulation and Parkinson's disease. So the first probiotic that we made was designed to convert glucose and fructose in the gut into mannitol, which is a sugar alcohol that diabetics use as a substitute. It's not used by humans like other sugars. It doesn't spike blood sugar. It's actually eliminated through the urine and the feces, and it acts like a prebiotic for the gut bacteria, and it's a free radical scavenger. So it's kind of a multi-purpose, really interesting molecule. And so that was our first concept that we came up with, is how could we build a team of microbes that could do this conversion in the gut and last for about 12 hours. So you take one in the morning and one in the evening, and they're always working for you. And so over that process, we made a prototype. It helped John significantly. And then we started just sharing it with other people and getting feedback. And some of those people were people who had challenges with their blood sugar or high level A1C, and we just started getting feedback at what a difference it was making for them. And so we decided in 2021 to officially bring out BiotiQuest into the market with that as our primary product. And then we started designing other working formulas to do things like support immunity, support sleep, support heart health, and one in particular for taking after you've taken antibiotics. So back to that understanding of how antibiotics affect our gut. And I don't know, maybe you can tell me how well your audience understands what the microbiome is, or if I should explain that.
Yeah, probably go ahead and explain that. I went ahead and dropped the link to the company, and they can look at your different products and stuff. I have personally taken them, so I can attest to definitely they're pure. I mean, you worked very hard on that, because a lot of times, well, I was in a big box store today and walked down the whole aisle of all the different vitamins and everything you can take, and it was like, I don't even know where this stuff is sourced and how clean it is. And, at this point in my journey, I just keep walking because if I don't know where it's sourced, but yeah. But yeah, if you want to go ahead and explain a little detail about what it
Sure.
is. Yeah.
So the microbiome is actually the trillions of microbes that are in and on our body. And they basically function as our internal pharmacy to maintain our health. So they produce vitamins, hormones, and neurotransmitters. Most people have, when they think about those things, they think they're either getting it from the food or they're producing it in their own body, but they're not thinking about the fact that the factory workers in your body that are producing a lot of those really important nutrients and messengers in the body are actually those microbes in the microbiome. And of course, what you feed yourself either feeds or does not feed them. And if you don't feed them, they'll feed on you. So it's a very, very important part of who we are. And I think I mentioned earlier the volume of genes in the microbiome in a stool sample compared to the human genome. This order of magnitude, that is all these enzymatic functions and things that are important to digesting food and even breaking down environmental toxins and things that we're exposed to. That microbiome is so critical for that. And we're actually more microbial than we are human. I think the ratio now is agreed to is maybe 2 microbial cells for every human cell. There are some people who go as high as 10 microbial cells to every human cell. So we're kind of like a big petri dish.
And so why would someone end up and need to take a supplement form? Because I've heard it in several spaces. Well, as long as you just have a diversity of food, you'll be okay. You'll be able to create that gut microbiome if you just keep a diversity. So why would we need a supplement in addition to it if we can just do it with nutrition?
Well, that's a really good question. If you look back historically, people ate a lot of fermented foods. And fermented foods are the foods that really have these working teams in them. So, sauerkraut, natto. I have actually a book called The Life Bridge, the Way to Longevity with Probiotic Nutrients. And food today, much of the food in the grocery store has been irradiated. And so the microbes that were on the food in the past that would help colonize our gut from a carrot or a cabbage or something that you were eating, you were getting some of those soil microbes. You were getting these important organisms that build those working teams in fermented foods. And because of the way we preserve and process and do things to our food, even it's difficult to just do it through diet if you have a broken down microbiome. I sort of equate it to like if you bought a farm that was kind of worn out and the soil wasn't very fertile, then you would need to you have to do some work. And
Yeah.
then I think you can support it with food. I don't think you have to take probiotics your whole life. But there is definitely a role for probiotics and especially fermented foods. I think it's a lifestyle thing, but eating fermented foods with each one of your meals, if you don't have a histamine problem, can be very beneficial.
I agree. Yeah, it's more like our common soil of farming today versus the regenerative ag soil. You got to end up and build that bottom ground up so that you're able to, reap the reward above ground. Because a lot of the root system, and that's where a lot of people end up and go wrong, is they're out there dealing with leaky gut. They're dealing with, a lot of these other gut issues that they just don't have that support for. So yes.
So, and it's interesting that you mentioned leaky gut because that was also one of the things I have looked at for quite some time, but I have looked at in my Parkinson's research the toxins that are produced by different strains of bacteria that were present in the microbiome samples. And these toxins can poke holes in the lining of the gut and make it leaky. There are a lot of food preservative, lots of different things can cause problems to the gut barrier, but I was particularly interested in the toxins coming from the bacteria that can do that. And even some of those have been engineered into the food. So the Bt toxin, which is engineered into corn and soy, the way that it works in a caterpillar is it pokes hole in the gut and causes the caterpillar to get sepsis. Well, that's really not too far off from, we've got a low grade level of endotoxemia. And that's letting the cell wall components of the gram-negative bacteria cross over and cause inflammation.
So, Martha, with the different strains that you guys use, do you want to kind of talk about that for the?
Sure. So we actually do use some. So and probiotics in general, if you just went into a grocery store and you looked at the probiotics on the shelf, probably 95% of what's in a retail store is all coming from the same 3 suppliers. And that's a company called Probi, one called Dinesco that is associated with DuPont Chemical, and the other one is Christian Hansen, which has been around and really been one of the top probiotic producers for decades. But they're all using about a dozen strains. They kind of just throw them in there. I mean, I won't, they just don't give a lot of thought to whether or not they're working as a team. So ours, we do get some of ours from other suppliers, Chris Hansen being one of those. But we actually have some of our own strains produced. And in particular, some of these actually come from fermented foods. So one of the main strains that we use is an organism called Leuconostoc mesenteroides. And that is an organism that is found in fermented foods around the globe. So, it doesn't matter what continent you're on, that microbe is there, which I found pretty interesting. But in our initial work looking to put together the team to convert the sugars and make mannitol, Leuconostoc was one of those main organisms. Another one was Bacillus subtilis, which is a soil-based organism that also has a lot of really interesting and unique properties. In fact, it makes I'm going to say it makes a sound. I have a research paper showing that it sends out a frequency that actually interferes with pathogenic bacteria and will knock them out. So, we often don't think about all the different tool sets that these microbes have. And that Bacillus subtilis is also a unique organism where it if there's not enough food for it, instead of attacking you, it will actually divide its colony, and part of the colony will die and it will feed itself. So it's, I guess from that perspective, more beneficial. Bacillus subtilis is also an organism that's found in natto, which makes nattokinase. If people have heard about that, that's an enzyme that can help with clotting. We have a strain called Pediococcus acetylactici. That's a strain that is often found in fermented meats, so it can actually help in producing proteolytic enzymes and producing or not preserving in a way that you don't get sort of putrefaction and a breakdown. I'm not explaining that one very well. It's it's mostly found in fermented meats or cheeses. And then one of the others that we have that is not in the sugar shift formula, but it's in our ideal immunity and in, I think, our antibiotic antidote, is one called Lactobacillus ruminus. This one was one that we actually isolated from a healthy human gut from our samples. It produces, so bacteria can produce something called they produce these molecules called bacteriocins, which are very specific for targeting certain pathogens. And it just so happens that Lactobacillus ruminus is very effective at killing foodborne pathogens like Listeria, Salmonella. And so, we recommend that product for people who may be going on foreign travel or maybe coming in contact, like if they eat out at a salad bar a lot or they're eating out at restaurants a lot, and they might be more prone to getting foodborne pathogens. We actually also have a unique Lactobacillus plantarum, and you can tell from the name plantarum, it's typically found on plants. But our plantarum was isolated from elderberries that came from a neighborhood in Colorado that we fermented, and it was naturally resistant to the herbicide Roundup and actually had specific genes for breaking Roundup or breaking down glyphosate organophosphates without producing a harmful breakdown product called AMPA. So it actually breaks it all the way down. And so that, we believe, is one of the major detoxifying capabilities of all of our formulas, which contain that Lactobacillus plantarum, is that it's helping people with that. And then, we're using some bifidobifidum and bifidolongum. So the bifidobacteria are known as the first one. Bifido infantis is one that you get from your mother if you're breastfed, typically. And that is one that shapes the immune system in the gut early on in life. And then you will go on to have additional species of bifidobacteria. But that's also one that's been lost quite frequently by the population more and more, because glyphosate actually does selectively kill most bifidobacteria. And then we have a few other lactobacillus species, and then in some of our, so in antibiotic antidote, or one of the other ones, we do have a Saccharomyces boulardii, and those will often be added as that's a yeast, and that can offset something like candida, because an interspecies competition actually, they knock each other out more often than they knock something that's less related to them out.
Which, and going through all those different strands, the first time I had really ever thought about or looked at, I mean, when I reintroduced foods, I did end up into the fermented aspect, just from an ancestral, like you said, standpoint. But when I first started to really dig deeper into the probiotic aspect, it was when I come across a study that said probiotics actually help to build that exclusion zone water. And it's kind of like a bell curve, if you will, to where not doing anything, there's no benefit, and overdoing it, kind of like what you're saying with rebuilding and recolonizing, and overdoing it isn't more beneficial, right? So you got to kind of find that happy middle ground. But I believe it was, it's been a while since I looked at the study, but I believe it was the lactobacillus that they tested in that, amongst several other things like holy basil and those type of things. But
I would love to see that paper. It's interesting, though, as when we have a computational model that's called the bioflux model, where we show how the bacteria interact together in the community. And in part of the graphs that we typically do, we show which microbes are producing water and which ones are using water. So I'd love to see that paper on the exclusion zone water, because that's, one of my ideas about how the microbes work is, is the water that comes from the microbial production that excludes.
The
Yeah.
surface around them that it carries. Yep.
Yeah. Amazing. Microbes are amazing. I love them.
Yeah. Just...
So I'm going to kind of shift, if that's okay, Becky.
Go for it.
Because Martha has her own story. And so I'm going to kind of have you tell our audience, like, what was your story? Because I know personally, I've seen a big transformation in you. So, how'd you do it?
Sure. So I started a company. I was working hard all the time, just kind of stopped working out, and was really focused on John and not myself. And then it was like fall of 2021, I got connected to Ben Azadi, and we were scheduling a time for Ben to interview me in December. We met at the Kick Sugar Summit because we were both part of the Kick Sugar Summit. And so I had scheduled the interview, and then I came down with COVID, and I was not terribly sick. I was sick for about a week and a half, maybe, but not that bad. But my husband, John, got really, really sick. And so then I was, helping take care of him. So by the time I got to my interview with Ben, I probably looked the worst I've looked in a long time. Plus I was carrying extra weight and all this. And I started telling my story to Ben, and he was talking about keto camp, and we sort of hit it off. And I thought, and he said, well, I've got I have one of my free weeks challenges coming up. Why don't you do the challenge? And I had a 2-week Ayurvedic retreat that I was doing, that I was going to do a 4-day dry fast at the beginning. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go do this fast, reset my body, and then I'm going to come back and join this week-long challenge. And so I did that. And after doing the challenge, I was like, I got to join this camp. And so I joined the keto camp, and I carried on really pushing through to make sure that I was actually getting in ketosis and following Ben's whole plan and getting along the way. And plus my daughter was getting married in June. And so I kind of looked at that picture, and I was like, that's not really how I want to look at the wedding. And so I lost 20 pounds. I was working out, eating right, just getting back in that right kind of mindset. And so much of that I really attribute to Ben and the keto camp and all the people in the keto camp. Just the support, the answers to the questions, listening to other people's questions. I mean, it's a great community for how to live a healthy life. And so it's made a big difference in me. I was looking at some on your phone when it gives you sort of the history of the last year or two, and it was a portrait of the last 2 years, and it actually was telling that story. And I was like, I should download that and put it on Keto Camp and show the difference, because I look better, I feel better, and I can't say enough for how transformative it is.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that we always talk about is pictures and the measurements. I mean, I can't tell you how many times Sherry and I have had that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, my clothes, I mean, it was funny because we were moving, and I had jeans from years before that I was like, these are never going to fit me again. And then they were too big. And so that was a lot of fun to experience that. And it was also interesting to me because I had spent all this time focused on the microbiome, but really wasn't focusing, or at least in the last 2 years before I joined Keto Camp, had really not been focusing on my own microbiome health. And so it was just a great reminder to get back to those basics.
So recently, you tried something and it surprised you, and it comes in a, I don't know, does it come in a can? Do you know what I'm talking about?
What are you talking about?
Didn't you try like anchovies, or you had
Oh, yeah, the mackerel.
the mackerel? That's it. Yeah, tell that story, because of course I'm commenting, yuck, but
You're so funny. Yeah, because I was like, what does she know that so I have bought, so we talk on Keto Camp about doing either the sardine or the mackerel challenge, or eating these fish. And I'm not a huge fish lover, although it's funny, I grew up eating tuna fish as a kid all the time. But so I had bought these cans of mackerel and sardines, and they were in my cabinet, and I was like, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. And it was just like this sort of mental thing that I was having a hard time getting over. And this week I actually opened up a can of mackerel and ate it, and it was great. I was like, okay, what have I been stewing? It was great. And also, I actually had, I think, more energy that day and just felt better overall. I mean, maybe it was the placebo effect, but um, it was pretty amazing. So, I think there's some people who've done like a week-long challenge. I haven't gotten that far, but
yeah,
I'm thinking I'm going to add it several times a week for sure.
no kidding. I know this makes Becky happy. Look at her. She's always,
Absolutely. I
you're,
couldn't
yeah,
get the
you're always
unmute
talking about.
button, but there's so much benefit when it ends up and it comes to, I call it the smash. Salmon, mackerel, anchovy, sardines, and herring. And most of my coaching clients, I will end up and tell them, at least 3 days a week, if not even 4, depending what they're dealing with, depending, where their hormones are at, what we're trying, to look at, even in the hormonal cascade, because those are your fattier fish. So yeah, I like the seafood aspect.
So I was very proud of myself for doing that.
So did you just eat it straight out of the can, or did you air fry it?
I ate it
Oh,
straight out of the can. I was trying to think. I was like, okay, what could I do with this? And I thought, I'm just going to eat it out of the can. And it was great. It was in olive oil.
yeah. I was just say straight out of the can. Sometimes if I want something, warm, I'll even do that with my little sardines. I'll just pop them in the air fryer. Not, I'll take them out of the can, but I'll set them on the rack in the air fryer and warm them up. I've even made like a seafood salad and ate it with pork rinds. When I'm, strict carnivore, I'll make like the baconaise and mix it with the sardines. And yeah, I like my seafood, which is odd that I live in the middle of Nebraska and completely landlocked, but I love seafood.
Interesting. Well, I didn't grow up loving seafood growing up in Kentucky, but when I go to the coast and I can get fresh seafood, I always loved it, but haven't been a huge seafood lover. So I'm actually happy for having been nudged to do that.
Now we just got to get Sherry on board of trying.
Oh, you haven't tried it yet, Sherry?
I can't. Yeah, I can't even. Yeah, there's it's just a whole thing. I think it goes back to the days of my poor dad fishing and eating bluegill growing up, right? And my parents, oh, be careful of the bones, and it's just a whole thing. I honestly, I don't know how to fix fish. And I think that's from growing up in rural Indiana. So again, like you guys, landlocked, like I didn't have shrimp. the first time I had shrimp, I think I was out of high school by like a year or so. And that was the first time I had shrimp. So yeah. Yeah, I just don't think I can do
I'm not going there yet.
it.
Okay, well, you're doing great anyway.
Right. I have this strange feeling that when I see Becky in person, she's gonna pull something out of her purse or something and go, here, try this, It's like a fear.
I'll
Well,
be
you
the
know,
crazy one that starts carrying a can of sardines everywhere I go.
what's interesting is those fish were trying to get the omega-3s, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things that Dr. Kano, Raul, Dr. Kano and I have looked at, and we actually have microbes that can make omega-3s. So that's on our list down the road to make a probiotic that can make omega-3s in your gut.
I'll wait for that.
I was gonna say that's not your pass to get out of trying it.
So how great would that be? So
I know, right?
eat up our sugar with Sugar Chef, support our immunity with Ideal Immunity, and we'll have one that makes, okay omegas or something in your gut. I don't know.
That's funny. So yeah, I mean, and you've maintained your transformation too.
I have
You
stayed
have.
pretty true to and it's been a little bit of a challenge because John was not on keto. I've started trying to move him to keto. We're actually working with we have our first appointment tomorrow um, with a woman who works kind of with the electrical circuitry of the body. But one of the initial things that she talked to us about with people with Parkinson's was the inability to process fats. And she said that's one of the first things that she works on. And then he would be able to do better because he's also very, very thin. So, you know, we do a lot of times we do keto, we're thinking we're trying to lose weight. Well, if you don't have any fat on your body, there's no weight for you to lose. So I'm trying to balance out. There's a lot of evidence that keto and ketosis can be really good for the brain, for neurological disorders, but also when you're super thin, you got to kind of balance out keeping some meat on the bone. So, but I have stayed pretty consistent with my keto keto flexing. So when John's going to have more carbs, I'll have my carb day. But
And I think that's a perfect way of doing it. I mean, obviously with John, it's not always about eating more, but I understand also, with the Parkinson's in the aspect of making sure that he's digesting the fat because of what it does to the nervous system. It repairs the myelin sheaths. It ends up, there's a lot to, ketosis and neuroinflammation as well. So being able to get in there, but it's like you said, you don't want him to be just skin and bones either. So it's not always just, well, he can eat more, he can eat in surplus. He needs to be assimilating those nutrients and getting the benefit.
and I think that's one of the main issues in people with Parkinson's is they are not digesting the nutrients. And often, I mean, that's another sort of interesting thing is constipation. Like I'm always talking about poop, but constipation is that can long-term constipation precedes a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease by 10 or 15 years in a pretty good percentage of people who get Parkinson's. And it's that waste sitting in the body, but also I think it's the body holding on to things because the nutrients aren't being absorbed. And so there's sort of these mixed signals of I've got to get something out of what's in here. But then you have the toxins from the bacteria building up. So it's an interesting challenge for sure, and one that we're working toward getting him to. Actually, we're going to do a long-term fast in January, so we're building up that process to do somewhere between 10 to 14 days to see what that does. I've actually talked to a gentleman with Parkinson's who I had talked to him 3 years ago when he found my Martha's Quest. I have a blog where I write about Parkinson's and alternative health things, and so I had communicated with him several times about 3 years ago, and I actually just wrote a new blog post about the connection between Parkinson's. There's a similar connection in diabetes with the cell wall component, this lipopolysaccharide of the gram-negative bacteria. There's an animal model in Parkinson's and an animal model in diabetes that uses LPS to basically give the animal either Parkinson's or diabetes. And I had written a blog about that. And this gentleman wrote me and he said, well, don't you want to know how I cured my Parkinson's? And I said, sure, here's my phone number, give me a call. And he called me and he fasted for 62 days. Now that's a pretty long time, and I'm not recommending that anybody do that, but we had a very interesting conversation because he had been in communication with a doctor I think he's in New Zealand or Australia. I think his name is Michael Phillips. He's a neurologist, and he has presented quite a bit about fasting and ketosis and Parkinson's disease. And so he had communicated with him quite a bit before he did his long-term fast. But, I think about the importance of cleaning up all those, the debris, if you will, whether that's from the bacteria or your own cells. And a long-term fasting will kick off autophagy and clean up all that waste. And autophagy is something that is also not working in Parkinson's.
So you said that you're kind of going on a 10 to 14 day. Is part of that going to end up and be dry fasting, or is it all going to end up and be like water fasting, fat fasting? What aspect of fasting?
So we're still working on the layout of what we're going to do. When I did my initial fast, I actually did a dry fast. So, and I lean toward the dry fasting, but like most people are like, you're not going to dry fast for 11 days, are you? But if you, August Dunning, who's a professor at Caltech, he's a physicist, but he works with the astronauts. And he actually has a book on dry fasting called the Phoenix Protocol. It's based on the work of these two physicians in Russia who have cured all kinds of long-term illnesses through this long-term fasting protocol. But they have there's a whole setup of a couple of months before that you start kind of preparing yourself to go into the fast. And I'm actually doing it with, we're going to do it with another couple, and he leads the root cause protocol. And so we're mapping out how we're going to do it and what type of blood testing and things that we're going to do along the way. And there's some other laboratory research tests that you can't really get on your own. And we're talking to some other research labs to see if we can get measurements for those as well. So we'll have our own little mini study. Do you have a preference, Becky, for dry fast or water fast? Or
Well, we have one of our coaches in the community. He's done like the Phoenix Protocol. He's done, a lot more of the dry fasting. I have not. I have not attempted at doing the dry fast, but I have done several water fasts and also my fat fasting. So I put a protocol together where you're still mimicking, it's dating back to the Kekwik diet in the fat fasting aspect. So you're mimicking the fast a little bit, but it also helps in people that have high cortisol to have that fuel source for the body.
Mhm.
And they do actually still get some of the benefit, not necessarily, all the autophagy benefit that kind of what you're seeking, but it does push them a little bit deeper into the ketosis because you're still providing them with the fat. But yet, and we know from let me rephrase that. Many would suggest, right, that when you are in ketosis, the autophagy happens quicker. And essentially, if you are fat fasting, you're jump starting that, if you will. You're putting your body into, and then many people can even like bridge it out into that longer of a fast. And I do personally know a gal that has done 21-day water variation of a water and a fat fast. So it did help her to go a little bit longer, just at periods, to be able to have some of that, suet or, whatever animal source fats. It's not like she's, gnawing on a stick of butter necessarily, and there's benefit to the beef suet also when it comes to the fat cells and how we end up when we uncouple them and stuff with stearic acid in it. But like I said, that's just me personally. One of these days, when I keep saying when I have nothing going, but it always seems like something comes up because, I was going to end up and do it in October leading into like the winter when I start to, pull things out from the abundance of summer, going back into more of a carnivore approach during the winter time. I'm like, oh, I'll end up and I'll do an extended fat fast. And then, of course, we're, the keto camp coaches and Ben are all going to Utah for the conference, the Live It to Lead It conference. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to end up and be, fat fasting while I'm there. And then we had a wedding and several other things. So eventually maybe things will settle down and I'll be able to do, it more extended. But
yeah, that for me, like when I did the dry fast, because I was at a retreat center, there's no refrigerator, there's no other person. I mean, uh, we're doing it here, but like the people are coming to stay. We have a guest cabin next door, and we don't have to put any food in the refrigerator. So there's no, I mean, it's nice to be in a situation where you can not have any temptation.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, because it's tough enough. But I think like for me, once I got over the hump of like day 2, I really wasn't hungry, and I could have gone longer, except I was going to be flying, and I was like, I don't know if it's that smart for me to be dry fasting while I'm flying across country. So I decided to go ahead and eat.
So when you ended up and you did your dry fast, did you have to come out of it slow, like with water and then broth, and kind of like how we normally talk about breaking fast?
I mean, that's how I did it. Yeah. I just had, I had broth at the retreat place where I was. And then I got home and I made bone broth and just ate bone broth for, I don't know. I mean, I would put a little bit of stuff in it, but mostly I did bone broth for close to 2 weeks. Bone broth and meat. I have to go back and look at what I did, but he recommended absolutely 0 carbs for the first 2 weeks after you come out of the dry fast. So that was kind of interesting.
Which I was going to say, and Sherry's been doing a little bit of fat fasting as well. So I've seen her raise her hand when I said, cortisol a factor.
Yeah, it's been a huge factor because I'm still reversing my type 2 diabetes. When I do a fast or a water fast, my cortisol, my blood sugar, everything raises and I gain weight.
Because you're stressing, or
Yeah.
it's a stressor on the
Yeah.
body. I wonder if, I mean, like, not that I'm going to plug my product, because
Yeah.
I wonder if taking sugar shift in that process would help, because I have had people who ask me, well, will this help me if I don't eat sugar? And I say, well, your body produces glucose and fructose when you're under stress. And I have, I think it would potentially help with that, but
And I still have some, but yeah, no, that's interesting. I didn't even think about taking the sugar shift, but I've been doing more of the fat fasting, and my blood sugars respond better. And I'm actually, let's see, what was that, Becky? A period of 11, 12 days, I dropped 7.2 pounds
wow.
eating the fat fasting, like fat and very, very adequate protein. I mean, we're talking,
And,
and zero carbs. I mean, and my body is loving it. But again, because of my type 2 diabetes and being, all the other fun stuff that goes with it. But and I mean, that's my journey. That's my whole thing, is to reverse my type 2 diabetes and get off. Well, I am off my diabetes meds now. I've been off for about 3 months about
Well,
3 months.
congratulations. That's really a
Yeah, thanks.
compliment.
Yeah, because when we met at KetoCon, I was still in the throes of taking my, diabetes meds, and, I mean, I was horribly embarrassed to let people see me because things
You
weren't
look great.
working. Ah, thanks. But yeah, I mean, it's just funny, but since KetoCon, I've dropped another size. And that was the end of April. So I mean, and that's what's interesting. I know you geek out. It's like everybody's, we're all metabolically different, and what works for you and what works for me. And it's kind of fun. So I always find when you go off on the tangent of, and tying in diabetes to, when you share stuff, I'm always like, wait a minute, time out. What did she say?
Well, because we actually did do a clinical trial in diabetes with our sugar shift product, and we got improvement in insulin resistance marker that's called HOMA IR. We got, in the first 3 months, we got a stabilization of fasting and postprandial blood glucose. We unblinded at the end of the study and took 10 subjects and kept them on. And at the end of another 90 days, so a total of 180 days, we had a 14% decline in A1C, and both fasting and postprandial blood glucose. So,
well, I know you are pressed for time. You've got something going on here in a few minutes, so we want to be mindful of that. But I know, Martha, I'm so glad you came on. We would love to have you back sometime.
well, I appreciate you having me, and maybe I can come back and talk to you after we do our fast.
Yeah, let's set that up.
Give you the skinny on that,
Yeah.
or we can come on live and you can see that we're still alive after
There
10.
we go. We'll get all of you guys lined up, and
Yeah, that could be kind of fun.
yeah. So is everybody hungry? No.
that would be awesome. So real quick, tell everyone where they can end up and find you. I shared your company link there on the screen, but
Sure. So you can find us at BiotiQuest.com. That's BiotiQuest.com. Or I have a personal blog where I write about Parkinson's and alternative health and Parkinson's in the microbiome. And that is marthasquest.com. And if you really want to geek out on some of the science stuff, we have our the BioCollective website. But really, the place to go get the products that will have an impact on your gut microbiome is BiotiQuest.com. So, and I really appreciate you guys having me here. And letting me tell my story.
Absolutely. We appreciate you. And for those that maybe are just jumping on, we were an hour early tonight. So go back and watch this. Make sure that you end up and support that microbiome. Thanks, Martha.
Absolutely. Thanks, Martha.
Thanks, Sherry.